Hello, friends. I'm Chris. I'm with Transformation Nation Yoga and Wellness. And today I'm going to bring you a sunrise yin class that really has more of an anatomical focus than an energetic focus. Now, we'll talk at some point during the practice about what an energetic focus might look like for a practice like this. But today, what I'd like to focus on is the spinal column. This is the literal backbone of the body, right? So it provides structural support for the whole body. It also protects the system and bundle of the spinal cord, which connects the central processing unit, the brain, to the whole rest of the body and allows that energy to flow through that system and to communicate. So the things that I'll be thinking about in the practice today, and then I'll ask you to think about too, first are for purposes of our practice today, it's bigger than this, but for purposes of our practice today, three segments of the spine. The cervical spine, or the neck. So if you reach your hand to the back of your neck now, you'll find one very bony, jutty vertebrae, right? This is the C7 vertebrae. It's the lowest vertebra of the cervical spine in the neck. So we'll be looking at flexion, extension, and rotation there. And then below that C7 vertebrae, down to the bottom of the rib cage. So visualize bra strap level. That bra strap level is about T12 vertebrae. There are 12 vertebrae that make up the middle section of the spinal column, the thoracic spine. So we'll be looking at healthy flexion and extension and rotation of the thoracic spine as well. And then the lower 5 vertebrae that we'll be working on during the practice today, the lumbar spine. Now, of these segments, the area that I think I hear people complain about discomfort, pain, or chronic or acute injury most commonly is the lumbar spine. But I know people get locked up in the thoracic spine. And if you've ever watched, like I remember watching my grandfather's drive when I was a little boy and wondering why Grampy couldn't turn his neck better, right? And now I just turned 49 and I have a much better sense of what life looked like from there. So we're looking at loosening up connective tissues, seeing if we can provide a little bit of comfort. I'm not going to be doing anything for stabilization today. That would be a different practice, but we can do that in another practice as well. But the goal is that we work through this natural ranges of motion. Now, for props for today, what I recommend, a mat is nice for a yin practice. It's not strictly necessary. I recommend 2 blankets. One, I like folded out over my mat. Parts of my body are a little bony, and pressing directly down into the earth doesn't feel great. 2 blocks. I would also recommend a bolster. If you don't have a bolster, you could use like a body pillow. You could also use a couch cushion or anything like that. So let me have you start in a seated position. This is a yin practice, but I found particularly for moving the cervical spine, sometimes it's really difficult in a yin practice to get those kind of ranges of motion. So we're going to add some gentle movement here. So come to a sustainable seat. So for me, elevating the hips means my pelvis rotates forward, which means my lower back can be much more comfortable. I can sit like this for a long, long time. And then stack your joints, float your head over your shoulders, over your hips. And let's start out by finding some length. So press down into your seat, lengthen out of your spinal column. And then as you exhale, I'd like you to maintain that length along your spinal column. Let all of the soft tissues descend and drop down toward earth. Good. All right, now find a level position for the neck. So maybe visualize enough space between your chin and your throat that you could hold, say, a tennis ball. All right. On your next inhale, I would like you to just press the back of your head toward the back edge of your mat or the wall behind you, whatever surface is behind you. In my body, this gives me a little bit of a double chin. Exhale, relax your neck. Inhale, give yourself a double chin. That's not my best yoga cue, but it's pretty effective here. Exhale, relax your neck. Inhale, press the back of your head toward the back edge of your mat. Nice level chin. Exhale, relax. Inhale, give yourself a double chin. Exhale. Let your head come back into neutral. And then one more time on an inhale, press the back of your head toward the back of your mat and just hold. Notice you may feel muscles on the sides and back of your neck firing up here. What we're looking for is levator scapulae. Relax your neck. Good job. Now, take your left hand, take the left thumb, plug it in, probe around, find the spot where the soft tissue meets the bony structure of the shoulder blade. And then left elbow up toward the stars. Bring the right hand to the crown of your head so your right elbow points forward toward your device. On an inhale, press down into your seat. Lengthen out of the crown of your head again. Exhale, use that right hand to gently fold your chin down towards your right shoulder. And we don't live in the exact same body, so your experience in a pose may be very different from mine. Where you may be feeling this, though, is on the back left-hand side of your neck. Long stretch. And with that, use your right hand, draw the crown of your head back up the center. You can drop your left hand down into your lap for now. We'll just change sides. Right thumb, probe, find the area where the soft tissue meets the shoulder blade. Plug it in there. Right elbow points toward the stars. Left hand on the crown of your head. Left elbow points forward. Inhale, lengthen along your whole spinal column. And then fold your chin down toward your left shoulder. Lift the crown of your head back up to center. Release your right arm. Left hand comes to the outside of your right thigh. Right hand down by your right hip, or maybe on your bolster. But on an inhale, find length along the spinal column. This is going to be a dual action twist. As you exhale, I'd like you to rotate your heart to the right. But as you rotate your heart to the right, I'd like you to rotate your hips back to the left. So you might visualize an action like you were trying to wring water out of a wet dish rag, right? You wouldn't just twist it at the top, you twist it in the opposite directions as the top of the bottom. So this does two things. I do think it's a more effective twist. It also protects the lower back a little bit. It lifts the location of the twist higher up out of the lumbar spine, and it gets it out of the sacroiliac joint, which we could potentially injure if we don't twist skillfully and with some restraint. Come back through center, and we'll change sides. Right hand on the outside of your left thigh, left hand down by your left hip. Inhale to find length. Exhale, just like the other side, dual action twist. Rotate your heart to the left, your hips to the right. And if you wanted to get into the neck, you could really start to rotate the neck, shifting your gaze out over your left shoulder. But if you want to do that for you. Don't do that for me. I don't have a strong preference, friends. And we're going to do some work on hands and knees from a tabletop before we move into the yin practice. Come back through center and then roll over your crossed ankles and make your way into a tabletop or a quadruped shape with your shoulders floating over your wrists, your hips floating over your knees. And then I'd like you to shift your gaze maybe 4 or 5 feet forward in front of your mat. So not cranking in the back of the neck, but just gently forward. Inhale right here. On an exhale, draw your chin to your chest. Bring your big toes together. Hands and elbows stay shoulder width apart, but start to drop your seat down toward your heels. And then on an inhale breath, leave your chin tucked in towards your chest for now. Lift back up into tabletop. And then at the very top of this movement, shift your gaze 4 or 5, maybe even 6 or 8 feet forward in front of your mat. Exhale, chin to your chest. Drop your seat to your heels. Lift yourself up, and then at the very last 25% of this movement, as you rise up, shift the gaze forward. Good. Now do 2 more of those to your own breath. And then from here, we're just going to do some plain old-fashioned cat roll. So at the top of this movement, the gaze is probably forward. So shift it back down. I'd like the back of your head buoyant, but maybe a gaze just at the top edge of your mat, or maybe it's the tips of the point between the tips of your fingers where that would meet. On an inhale breath, drop your belly down toward the earth. Turn the eyes of your elbows forward. Lift your chin. Open your heart. Shift your gaze forward. Exhale, press into your hands, press into your shins, round through your shoulder blades. I got a little thoracic spine adjustment at the bottom of this movement where I'm a little locked up this morning. Inhale, drop your belly, open your heart. I'd like you to lean into this pulling movement like you were dragging the heels of your hands back towards your knees. Exhale, round through your shoulders. And then if you would, do 3 more of these to the cadence of your own breath, dropping the belly, opening the heart on the inhale, maybe tucking the toes. Exhale, rooting down into the earth and pressing the space between your shoulder blades skyward. Good. Now, after 5 full iterations, come back to neutral. Then I'd like you to have a block close to the top edge of your mat. To start to shift yourself forward, come into a Sphinx pose. So here, I would like your shoulders floating over your elbows. Lengthen your legs out long behind you. Take a block, if you would, at the highest setting. Place it in between your wrists before you get too set up. And then everything from your seat and your lower back down to your ankles goes soft. So your ankles may roll to the inside or the outside. That's fine. And maybe a little bit of muscular engagement required to keep your shoulders floating over your wrist, but really not much. So from here, maybe flip your palms up toward the stars. That otherwise, I feel compelled to drag myself forward. Release your forehead down to a block. Right? It's not wrong to let your forehead just drape down toward the earth. I don't care for that in my practice. I can tell you about that another time. But a slumping in between the shoulders, as long as the shoulders are floating over the elbow, that's really the only thing that I'm looking for in terms of alignment. But here's the other thing. Two areas where we really tend to clamp up and the muscles are engaged in a way that's not helpful to us. One is the belly. The belly is tight. So I'd like you to soften your belly, soften your low back. And often the glutes engage here. Right, so soften the glutes. And there's pretty good reason for the glutes for sure, because in it, we do the same pose in vinyasa, but the cueing is really different. So in vinyasa, I would say things like press the shoelace parts of your feet into the earth until your knees lift up. Drag your elbows and your hands back towards your waist. I would say things like that, where here, really the only, other than shoulders floating over your elbows and soft through the belly, those are the only 2 common points between the 2 versions of the shape. That doesn't make one better or one worse. It just means we're optimizing for very different things when we do this pose. But here we're looking for a sense of back bending. So you may feel a little bit of compression in the low back, maybe even a lot. And opening up the front plane of the body, all along the stomach, the chest, all the way up to the throat. Now, as a reminder, we're looking for a threshold of sensation that's right on the edge of discomfort and pain, right? So on a scale from 0 to 10, start out on at least a 4, no more than a 6. And sometimes if we open up with some restraint, we'll open up some space. So check in, and if you've got that space now, one option for more sensation, turn your palms down toward the earth, turn the fingers out, maybe hands a little wider, press into the heels of your hands, lift up into Sphinx pose. So elbows floating generously up off the earth. And for even more sensation, the closer you walk the heels of your hands in towards your waist, the more sensation you get. But if you do that, I'd like you to just check in and see if you had to give up any kind of equanimity along the way. So what do I mean by that? Are you now clamping in the glutes? Right? How did I know that? It happens to me. See if you can relax your glutes. Are you clamping in your belly? The muscles in your belly engage. Can you let go there? Right, there's certainly more muscular engagement that's involved here. But is there anything in your shoulders, anything in your jaw that you can relax? What's the quality of the tissue and the muscles around your eyes? Can you soften there? No special breath required for this practice. So if you're accustomed to an ujjayi breath, sometimes, especially at higher levels of sensation, I find that can be a really nice focal point for my attention. Also not really necessary, just a comfortable natural breath. But if you chose Sphinx pose, drop your elbows down to the earth. For just a breath, lower your whole body down, resetting here, and hands under your shoulders, press up onto your knees, grab your blanket or your second blanket, whatever's appropriate. And we're going to take snake and rat. Right, so start out with a blanket folded in two, and then fold it into a quarter, and then an eighth. And if you've never done a belly roll in yoga before, this might be a good starting point. So from here, start from the bottom, roll your way up. I go from the non-tasseled end to the tasseled end, but it's just so I can keep it straight. That's not the right way or the only way. So the other thing I would want you to know, the more narrow your initial fold is, the more sensation you'll get when you start to roll. So I like a little bit more sensation. So I'm going to do another half fold. And then with a little bit of imagination, we get this little can of peanuts, right? So if your can of peanuts is wider, right? So this is probably what, 7 or 8 inches wide, maybe at most. If it's wider than this, I would have the top and the bottom of this imaginary can of peanuts open up to the left and side edges of your mat. If it's more narrow than that, like 7 inches or less, I find I get better sensation if the top and the bottom of that can are facing the top and bottom of my mat. All right, now come down onto this blanket, place your belly button right about in the center. And a good place to start might be on forearms, right? So as a forearm plank, but relax your legs. Feet maybe up to hip distance apart. Right, so if you've not done this before, one thing, just so you're aware, it won't hurt anything. But it's weird. And if nobody says anything to you, we always wonder, am I the only one? But at a high enough level of sensation, you will definitely feel your pulse in your belly. Okay, it won't hurt a thing, I promise. And now from here, if you wanted to add sensation, flatten your body out. So you might imagine almost like you were skydiving and you're free falling before you pull the ripcord. Like, this is a mechanical release for the psoas. The psoas is a muscle. It's a hip flexor. It does lots of things for us. It's really, like, to say it's a hip flexor is really understating it. It's foundational to human movement. So among its distinctions, it connects the upper body and the upper part of the skeletal system with the lower part of the skeletal system. Right, the action of being able to lift the knee up toward the chin from a standing position, or even a supine position on our back, we were able to do that because of the work of the psoas. Right, so if you're familiar with a cut of meat called filet mignon, right, if you're a meat eater, the filet mignon, that comes from the psoas of whatever animal was harvested for that. Right, now, in terms of low back pain, there are lots of potential causes, but in terms of soft tissue common causes for low back pain, there are 2 really common culprits, and one is the psoas. And this is based on movement patterns, right? Because in our current society, we spend lots of time sitting, either sitting at desks or driving, and that psoas gets shortened. Right, and because of its attachments, it attaches to the bottom of the diaphragm, that T12 vertebrae I mentioned earlier, and all 5 vertebrae of the lumbar spine. So you can imagine if it gets locked short, it starts to pull all of the vertebrae toward the front. They become deformed, right? So it causes low back pain. So this is a mechanical release for that psoas.
So it doesn't mean that this is going to relieve lower back pain, but what I've seen happen in my body and in the bodies of other people with whom I've worked, if someone has low back pain that is at least in part caused by a tight psoas, 2 or 3 minutes in snake and rat in a belly roll like this can sometimes bring almost instantaneous relief for 4 or 5 hours. So, and the nice thing about it is we all have blankets at home, so it's a yoga prop that you have. All we have to do then is to use it. Right. So I have a lot of clients for whom this becomes a regular part of their daily wellness maintenance. They do a belly roll on a blanket for 3 or 4 minutes every morning. They do the same thing 3 or 4 minutes every evening. And it's the difference between them moving with pain and them moving powerfully throughout the day. Right. Start to come back up on to forearms. And then lift yourself up out of the shape. Ooh, maybe come back to all fours. You can set your blanket aside for now. And grab a bolster. And I would like you to sit down onto your right hip with your right shin parallel to the top edge of your mat. My orientation is going to be different just for demo purposes. Right. And then put a generous bend in the left knee. So left shin parallel with the left hand edge of your mat. So this is deer pose. And what I want from this here is gravity pressing the whole weight of your body as much as we can get to draw your hips open and down toward the earth. So here we have lateral rotation of the right hip, medial rotation of the left hip. And if you'll notice, my body tends to cant off to the right here, right? I think that's pretty common, pretty natural. So if that's the case, I've just got my right arm on the bolster. If you have a bend in that elbow, it's going to get tired. You're going to have to rely on muscles. So straight arms are strong arms. So as close to straight as you can get. And then it's not perfect. I don't have exactly stacked joints, but most of the weight of my body is pressing downward. So this is where we start. And then I'll offer you an option in another minute. We're going to target another one of the culprits, really common culprits of low back pain. Really tight hips can be a contributor to low back pain too. So no harm in that way comes from this either. This can only help. So we got a bit of hip work that's planned in for today. But there is a small triangular shaped muscle in the low back on either side. It's called the quadratus lamborum, or for expediency, QL. And what can sometimes happen is it gets really tightly engaged on one side and under engaged on the other side, and the body doesn't like that. So we're not typically very symmetrical, right? But that kind of asymmetry, these are stabilizing muscles in part. The body doesn't like that, and it can cause really debilitating back pain. So we want side bends to help stretch that out. So we have a few of those, a few poses really specific for that today. Now, from here, this is not the only way to do it, but I'm going to cue you for twisted deer because this really lengthens out that quadratus lamborum. Walk your hands off to the right. Now your body is staged up over the bolster. So if you have more space, you could remove the bolster and go all the way down to the earth, or you could just lower your whole body and torso down to rest on this bolster. And then if you can, the goal is basically, this is from another yoga practice, terminology I'm sequestering from a different yoga practice, but go wet noodle, right? And notice the force of gravity still drawing the hips down toward the earth, but also notice the lengthening, the pulling and tugging along the side plane of the body, particularly in the lower back. That is that QL muscle that I'm looking for right there. So the next pose is really also going to be targeted on potentially loosening connective tissues for the low back, but in particular, that quadratus lamborum. But there's some other nice benefits to it too. And I'll tell you more about that when we get there. Start to walk your hands up onto your shoulders. This is not the only way to come out of this pose. It's the most gentle way I've found. Draw that left knee forward toward the right heel, and then see how much slack that creates. You can set your bolster out of the way for now. And I'd like you to come onto your right side. Rather than transitioning to the other side, we're going to do this as a 1-2 combination for the QL. So come up onto your right, the right side of your body. For now, float your right shoulder over your right elbow. All right, and then step that left leg forward. So the sole of that left foot comes past the left-hand edge of your mat. Now, we're not given cues like this in yoga very much, but I'd like you to really sink down into that right shoulder socket. Maybe even releasing your right ear down towards your right shoulder. And what I'm looking for here, ideally, we create space and length like a hammock type shape of that whole right rib cage. So creating space and length from that right armpit down to the waist. That left hand, that can stay right here on the thigh. You can place it in front of you. A teaser for where we're going, you can place it behind your low back too. It's totally up to you. So remember, our target level of sensation on that continuum from 0 to 10, where 0, you feel nothing. And 10 would be excruciating. You wouldn't be able to bear it. You would be compelled to move, maybe even cry out. We want to be at between a 4 and a 6. So little discomfort, but not pain. So remembering each time that I offer you options, that they're just that. So if I, for example, when I offer you an option to move on from here, if I'm already at a 6, at a high 6, knowing that the goal is creating space and length along the right side of the body, I could stay right here the whole time and be doing meaningful, productive work. Right? Nothing wrong here. Now check in with your body. Notice your current level of sensation. Again, you're fine to stay right here. One other option, bring your left hand down between your torso and the left edge of your mat. Apply enough pressure. You can slide that right forearm forward, come down onto your right shoulder, and then left hand grabs a handful of ribs on your left rib cage. Start folding that left shoulder down toward the earth behind you. Now, from where I am, I have probably a 6 to 8 inch gap under my left shoulder in the earth. So for me, I'm going to keep my left hand right on my left rib cage. But if your left shoulder comes all the way down to the earth or close, it might feel good, and it would add sensation to lengthen that left arm out long behind you. Right? But that's not the right way. That's only if you want to add more sensation.
All right, friends. If you lengthen that left arm out long, take a light grip with that left hand on some of the ribs on your left rib cage. Start lifting your left shoulder up, float it over your right, and step that left leg back. Float that over your right. Bring your hands under your shoulders. Press yourself up. We're going to take this series on the other side. So we'll start with deer. Sitting back on the right hip. Right shin parallel to the top edge of your mat. Left shin parallel to the top edge of your mat. Big bend in your right knee. Right shin parallel with the right hand edge of your mat. And because we're going into twisted deer, at least that's what I'm going to do in my body, I'm going to stage that bolster there. And to keep more of the weight of my body with stacked joints, I'm going to support myself, straight arms or strong arms, with my left arm on that bolster for now. So like typically when I teach, I mentioned energetics in the introduction. Typically when I teach yin yoga, I plan, sequence, and teach from a really energetic standpoint through the lens of a Taoist practice, through really the meridians of traditional Chinese medicine. But today I was more interested in a practice that was going to be really helpful for the spinal column. But if we wanted to look at an energetics standpoint for this practice, I'm sure we could find it in traditional Chinese medicine. But what immediately comes to mind to me is the Vedic traditions of some of our other yoga practices. So in the chakra system, in the Vedic arts, some of the energetic channels that have the flow of energy move up and down the chakra system, the ascending and descending, those are two channels called the Ida and the Pingala. And then the central channel, the Shushuna, it's called the Shushuna Mala. But that's the area that I think would physically correspond with the spinal column. So if we wanted to look for an energetic aspect to this, I think that's where we would find it. So here again, if you look at the anatomy of where we are right now, gravity is pressing the weight of our body down toward the earth, providing a not so gentle hip opening for many bodies, promoting lateral rotation of the left hip, medial rotation of the right. From here, you could stay right here the whole time. The weight of gravity drawing your hips down toward the earth, no harm comes from that. It's meaningful, productive work. Or walk your hands off to the left. Stage your torso over the bolster. And then you could lower your whole torso down to the bolster. Or again, if you have more space, I'm good right here. I'm more comfortable with the bolster. I would struggle and fight the pose without it. But if you've got more space and you wanted to add some sensation, you could remove the bolster too. You could transition to a folded blanket, or you could just let your torso drape all the way down toward the earth. Now feel for that QL muscle. So it's twisting and it's pulling on my right side and gently twisting on my left, just exactly the opposite of the other side, which is what we want.
Start to walk your hands up under your shoulders. Maybe slide your bolster off to the side. Again, one gentle way, not the only way. Slide that right knee forward toward the left heel. And then make your way onto your left side. Left shoulder floating over your left elbow. For now, whole right leg floating over your left. And then step that right leg forward, past the right hand edge of your mat. Start to slump down into that left shoulder. Left ear draping down toward the left shoulder. And with your left rib cage, a nice visual, it might be nice to visualize like the canopy on a big top tent, how it drapes down in between the wooden struts, and then recreate that kind of shape with your left rib cage. So I've had some experiences recently that have really challenged my idea of what's possible for restoring a healthier range of motion for my body. So as you know, I've practiced yoga for quite a long time, and I've had lots of gains, but not particularly big gains in flexibility. So my hamstrings are still super tight. My hips, up until very recently, super tight, and a lot of issues with tightness in my back as well. Right. So we have an expression, we tell people they need to learn to accept their limitations. Right. And I think that I know that's always intended well. And I think sometimes there's something to that that maybe has some value. But I also think too often we're encouraged to accept our limitations in something that's not a limitation we really have to accept. So one thing in my life that I've been thinking about recently is if I'm going to impose this limitation on myself under the guise of, and I'm using air quotes here, accepting my limitations, I'm going to do it with a lot of skepticism and a lot of care. I'm not just going to buy into that stuff anymore. Right? Sometimes we think about like our body's breaking down or the neck gets stiff. I mentioned watching my grandfathers drive and trying to turn their heads, right? And we think, or weight gain, right? And we think all of this stuff is just part of the aging process. And it's just not true. It's just not true. There are some changes. And in the end, time and gravity, they catch us all, whatever we do. But we have a lot more control over a lot of these factors than we think. Right now, from here, just like the other side, just stay right here the whole time. Meaningful, productive work, lengthening out to quadratus lumborum, serratus anterior, the whole left side of the body. Or right hand down to the mat between your torso and the right edge of your mat. Slide that left forearm forward, come down onto your left shoulder. Right hand grabs a handful of ribs on your right rib cage, and then start to fold that right shoulder down toward the earth behind you. So I think our yoga disciplines, I certainly didn't intend that as a diss on yoga. I had lots and lots of gains from power vinyasa yoga. Also got some injuries from power vinyasa yoga. So I've learned to balance that with some other practices, including a yin practice like this one right here. The functional movement is key. And somewhere in our practice, we need to work in functional movement. And I've recently found the value of flexibility training itself. And I think yin yoga has a lot of promise in terms of lengthening out the muscles and the fascia and applying healthy, constructive stress on the other connective tissues, such as the tendons, ligaments, and joints. Right? So we want to stretch muscles and fascia. We do not want to stretch tendons and tendons, ligaments, and joints. We do want to stress them. So if you lengthen your right arm long, if you would, right hand back to your right rib cage, lift your right shoulder up, float it over your left, step that right leg back, maybe bring it on top of your left, And then use good body mechanics. For me, that's going to look like hands under my shoulders, pressing myself up. Make your way into a tabletop shape, and I'd like you to have your bolster. And the tabletop is like we started when we did the cat rolling and the cervical spine cat rolling variation that we did. Your bolster, I would like maybe a third of the bolster down below wrist level. Now, let me come back here just for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go into frog pose. So I'd like you to start to widen your knees out. Turn your toes to the outside, right? So toes face out. And as you widen your knees out, I'd like your ankles to widen out with your knees. So from a head to toe line, knees and ankles are in one straight line. Right now, I'm going to change my position again. You stay right where you are. So knees start to widen out, ankles widen out with them. And then the human tendency here as we go into frog, the hips want to scoot forward because this reduces sensation. So instead of that, from a side to side plane, I would like your hips and your knees to be more or less in one line. And then start to lower your heart down onto your bolster or maybe all the way down to the mat. Right, so sometimes you see this done as a forearm plank, right? And it's not wrong, but it depends on what you are optimizing for, right? So doing this as a forearm plank is great for core strength, but this is not a core themed practice. You know, although core strength is really critically essential for back care, and forearm planks are a really healthy way to develop core strength, that's not my goal for you in this shape. My goal for you is to lengthen out and extend the connective tissues along the front plane of your body. But we're also stretching out the hip adductor muscles on the inside of the thighs. So you might feel these muscles, maybe even really intensely, from the inside of your knees all the way up into the groin. So that's what I'm really most interested in here. So I'm going to give you a breath to experiment with. So again, in yin practice, typically no specific breath. This is a breath that I'm borrowing from gravity yoga, right? And it's a 4-8 breath for down regulating the central nervous system. And I offer it because this pose here is so high sensation for so many people that it's often miserable. So let's see if we can make it more comfortable. So I'll describe it first, and then I'll walk you through a few iterations of this breath. But this is a 4-8 breath. It's a 4-count inhale through the nose and an 8-count exhale through the mouth, making a ha sound or a sigh. So exhale out all your breath. And then inhale through your nose for 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through the mouth with that sighing sound. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. Exhale. And continue on this cycle of breath, this 4-8 breath. And just see if that helps you to get comfortable enough that you can relax more into the shape. Maybe even creating more space, which might mean you take your knees and your ankles wider. It might mean you remove the bolster and let your heart and your head fold all the way down to the mat. As we start to transition out of this pose, for now, stay right where you are. right? I'm gonna give you a way to come out of this pose. It's not the right way. It's not the only way. It is a fairly gentle way. It's the most gentle way I've found. If you just allow the crown of your head to rock forward, eventually your hips will drop all the way down to the earth. You can lengthen your legs long behind you. And then maybe hands under the shoulders, press up onto your knees, make your way onto your back. Actually, instead of that, make your way into your right side. So right arm up over your head, rest your right ear on your right bicep. Put a bend in your knees as if you were trying to touch yourself in the chin. And then right hand to your right, left hand to your left rib cage. Start folding your left shoulder back behind you. This is a bit like the second action that we did in the fallen sphinx pose earlier, where we started out lengthening, expanding the rib cage, and then we folded the top shoulder down toward the earth behind us. But this is a variation of Yin's version of a supine twist, twisted root. I call this twisted root ball. With the knees drawn up closer toward the chin, it lifts the location of the twist. It gets it less in the lumbar spine and a little higher up, closer toward the thoracic spine. But it's certainly still twisting the lumbar spine as well. Start to lift your left shoulder up, float it over your right. Lengthen your legs out long. Just roll over onto your other side. I'd like you to come onto your left side. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to change my orientation. I'll do a little break dance. Coming onto my left side. And then left arm extends up over your head. Rest your left ear on your left bicep. Big, generous bend in the knees, like you were trying to touch yourself on the chin. And then right hand to your right rib cage. Start folding your right shoulder back behind you. Now, as I do this, notice that left ear is no longer on the left bicep. The back of my head comes down toward the mat. And I failed to mention this on the other side, but just like what happened in Fallen Sphinx, if that right shoulder comes all the way down to the mat or close, and you wanted to add more sensation, you could lengthen that right arm out long behind you. Like I have all the sensation I could possibly want right here, so I'm going to stay right here. And so we have a little bit shorter time than what is typical for us on the yin pose here. Let me tell you, we got a couple more minutes, but when we transition, we'll transition to our final resting shape. When we do that, you get to pick whatever you want. Now, this is typically cued as on your back, with your eyes closed, with your hands down by your waist, with your palms facing the sky. There's not a law that says you have to be on the back, with the eyes closed, with the hands down by your waist, with palms facing the sky. That's just how most people tend to cue this. Right, so you can do this on your seat, your belly, your back, or your side. But I'm going to offer two options, two suggestions, depending on where you might potentially be jammed up with back pain or back discomfort, whatever the case is. But they're just options, friends. This is your practice. You get to do whatever final resting shape that you like. So as I offer you options, if you already know what you want, just ignore the options. Go directly to your final resting shape and ignore that. And these two options, if you try the first one and you like that, while I'm introducing that second, I would just ignore that too. Stay right where you need to be. But the two options will be, the first will be if your tendency is toward pain or discomfort in the lower back. And the second one is if your general tendency is toward pain and discomfort in the center of your back, like that space between your shoulder blades. All right, friends, right hand back to your right rib cage. Lift your right shoulder up, float it over your left. Make your way into your final resting shape. Now, those options that I mentioned, in the first one, I'm going to cue you for restorative low back release. So if your tendency is toward pain or discomfort in the lower back, you might try this. So one blanket, maybe folded into eighths, close to the top edge of your mat, and a bolster under your thighs, just above the knees. So as you come down, forearms on this top blanket, and pubic bone reaches down toward the earth from that bolster. And then you can fold either cheek, either ear, and rest them on your forehead. This feels really nice to me, right? So this might be a good final resting shape. Today, however, I am more locked up in my thoracic spine than I am my lumbar spine. So I'm going to take a heart bench, and this is another option. So for heart bench, 2 blocks, one at the medium setting so that the long edge of the block is perpendicular to the long edge of your mat, which also will be parallel to the long edge of your mat, which will also be parallel to the long edge of your spine. And then another block, maybe 4 inches beyond that, maybe at the highest setting to start. Come down onto your back. Now, bra strap level, bottom of the rib cage. Again, T12 vertebrae sets on that bottom block. And then that other block is a pillow for the back of the head. Your legs, what to do with the legs? Go butterfly, bound angle. Place the soles of your feet on the earth. You can lengthen the legs long. I get more openness in the thoracic spine if I open my arms out to the side. So for me here, the goal is sort of just to relax and fall into the blocks and allow gravity to draw my shoulder blades down toward the earth on either side, right? And if you want more extension in the neck, you could lower that other block down to a lower setting, or you could even remove it, right? But you're going to have to figure out what's most comfortable for your neck. But choose a shape that allows you to fully relax. And I'd like for you to balance 2 qualities, equal parts relaxation and alertness. Begin to draw some deeper breaths. Feeling the pranic force, the life force energy in this fresh air, bringing your body back to life after this time you've taken the rest. And if your body's calling for movement, maybe start small, but begin to reanimate your body with small movements. That might look like wiggling your fingers or your toes. It might look like gently turning your chin from shoulder to shoulder. If those small movements are pleasing and your body wants more, invitation to go larger. Maybe rotate your hands at the wrists, your feet at the ankles. Take a full body stretch, really lengthen out. And then roll over onto either your right or your left side. Find a fetal position. And we're going to stay here 3, 4, or 5 breaths. But I'd like you to check in, notice how you're feeling. Notice in particular the connective tissues along your whole spinal column, lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine. And just notice if you can feel, through the work that you've done, you've opened up more space. And then press yourself up into a seated position with your legs crossed. Your eyes could be open or closed. I will have my thumbs at my sternum, my hands at heart center, and you can join me here, but you can also do anything you prefer with your hands. Thank you, friends, for moving and breathing with me. May this practice strengthen and heal your body, your mind, and your spirit. And that concludes our practice for today. Great work. Keep going. So if you remember the promises at the beginning of the class, I talked about working through all 3 segments of the spine that we'll focus on today: cervical spine of the neck, the center of the back, the thoracic spine, that area between the shoulder blades, in the lumbar spine, the lower back. And the ranges of motion that we were working on were flexion and extension, but also rotation. And again, I'm Chris. I'm from Transformation Nation Yoga and Wellness, and I hope to practice with you again soon.